Magandang araw po sa ating lahat. Ito po ang ating year-ender for 2013. Ano po bang inyong description sa taong ito? Marami pong salasalabat na pangyayaring nararapat suriin upang mabatid kung ano ba talaga ang ating patutunguhan. Tinignan ko po yung mga datos tungkol sa mga events for 2013. Meron po mga pangyayari tulad ng massacre sa Kawit, Cavite noong Enero 4, merong American mine countermeasure ship na sumadsad sa Tapatan Reef na tila hihingi pa yata ng paumanhin yung Pilipinas dahilan sa nabahura yung kanilang barko. So tayo pa yata mag-a-apologize. Pebrero 10, nagluksa ang mga buhaya sa pagkamatay ni Lolong. Tapos noong mga 20 ng Abril, meron din po namang barkong Chino na may 20 mangingisda na sumadsad rin sa Tapatan Reef. At marami pang insidente. Pero ang isa sa pinaka-landmark natin ay yung po namang 8 ng Hulyo na magsimula ang tapatan sa Aristocrat. Yun po ang ating simula at ang topic ay reproductive health. Marami rin pong insidenteng sumunod, tulad po naman na naganap sa Zamboanga City na marami rin pong nasawi. Sinundan po ito ng lindol sa Kabisayaan, Bicol Region at Mindanao. At siyempre pa ang bagyong si Yolanda. Disyembre 9 lumagda ang Pilipinas at Bangsamoro sa Power Sharing Agreement. Ika-11 ng Disyembre na itala ang pinakamataas na bilang ng mga mamamahayag na napatay sa loob ng taon mula noong 2009. 12 po ang napaslang ngayong 2013. Ngayon pong araw na ito, ang bilang po ay 21 na namatay sa bus crash sa South Expressway. Ano nga kaya ang sitwasyon? Bakit ganito? Yan ang ating pag-uusapan ngayon. So, meron pong isang newsmaker noon na nagsabi, nung ika-4 na pong anibersaryo ng kanyang panunungkulan bilang reyna ng Inglaterra, at ang sabi niya Annus Horribilis. It was a horrible year, yung 1992. So, ngayon po ay sinasabi ng Pilipinas na maganda ang ekonomiya. We will soon become a tiger economy, but others like Archbishop Cruz believes otherwise. It's more of a pussycat economy. So we're joined by former Senator Kit Tatad, former Secretary to the Cabinet Rick Saludo, Archbishop Oscar V. Cruz, Engineer Bert Swansing, and we have Mr. Michael Billington, nasa Asia Desk po ng Executive Intelligence Review mula sa grupo po naman ni Rarush. Let's start the ball rolling. How would Senator Tata describe the year 2013?
Tama po ang reyna ng Inglaterra. No? Annus Horribilis din po. Masamang taon po. Ito pong sunod-sunod na natural and man-made calamities. Ito po ang siguro maalaala ng karamihan na nangyari po sa ating bansa. No? Itong kamakailan lamang, mag-umpisa tayo dun sa lindol sa Bohol at Cebu. Sinundan ng Yolanda. No? Yolanda Hayan. May oil spill sa Iloilo. Napakalaki. Bago sumapit yan, nagkaroon tayo ng seed sa Zamboanga kung saan namatay yung ilang daang MILF ilang libo ang nasugatan, about 110,000 ang na-displace, no? 10,000 bahay ng mga mahirap ang talagang hindi lang nasira, nasunog, nawala. No? Hanggang ngayon po, walang negosyong gumagana po sa Zamboanga. So, maraming bagyo, no? Bagyo Yolanda. Yung Ondoy, matagal na yun.
Matagal na po
matagal
yun.
na yung Ondoy. No? Nalampasan yung Ondoy. Okay. Yolanda, hanggang ngayon, crisis pa rin ang nakikita natin. Pero mukhang mas matindi yung mga man-made calamities. No? May bagyong Yolanda, may bagyong Miriam, may bagyong Pinoy. Okay. Pero sa kabila po nito, pinagdiriwang po natin ang Year of Faith, no? Nitong nakarang taon na ito. At natapos po ang pagdiriwang ng Year of Faith ng Christ the King Solemnity. Ano? At natapos po ang taon ng ating Santo Papa ay nakilala po, hindi lang ng mga Katoliko, kundi pati po ng mga hindi naniniwala sa simbahang Katolika na merong isang tao na totoong makadiyos at inaakay ang lahat balik sa Panginoon. So, annus horribilis, as far as our politics is concerned, pero mukhang merong bagong liwanag tayo nakikita as far as our lives as human beings are concerned.
Okay. Thank you. Next question po naman kay dating Secretary to the Cabinet, Rick Saludo. Coming from Malacanang, described by some people as a snake pit coming from the outside. How do you look at it today, Mrs. Saludo?
Sorry. Well, first, I haven't been keeping tabs on the palace, so I would not care to talk about how things are there. Of course, tinitingnan na lang natin yung kanilang paggogobyerno at mukhang yung iniwan nating ekonomiya sa administrasyon noong 2010 ay sumulong nga alinsunod sa ating mga hinahangad. We left an economy that had strong fundamentals, that had fiscal reforms in place, and we are seeing now the natural progression of that economy as long as you maintain the policies of fiscal strength and open trading. So that's on the policy side. There are concerns also about how they are handling the issue of poverty. Ito ho, matagal na ho itong talagang problema ng ating bayan. Kahit na lumalago ang ekonomiya, naiiwanan ng mga maralita at mukhang hindi pa rin ito nalulutas kahit nitong sa kasalukuyang administrasyon sa kabila ng kanilang slogan na kung walang kurap, walang mahirap. Mukhang yung tuwid na daan at maging yung paglago ng ekonomiya ay kulang pa rin. We have seen in the latest poverty data coming out of the National Statistical Coordination Board makailan lamang na hindi pa rin gaanong bumaba ang poverty sa kabila ng 3 taong nagdaan at sa katunayan sa ilang mga rehiyon, ito ay mas sumama pa kumpara noong 2009. And in particular, one of the regions that is where things got worse, the poverty got worse, is Region 8, yung pong tinamaan ng Yolanda, which of course will even get worse now because of the disaster. ARMM is another area na gumanda na ng kaunti noong 2009 tapos ngayon bumaba na naman. So this is very clearly an area that needs not just the efforts of government, pero I think talagang ang buong bayan na, lalo na ang mga big business, kailangan talagang pagtuunan nito
So,
ng
yung inclusive growth, wala talaga nangyari, gano'n?
Well, even the government data show that, no? At sa katunayan, yung tinatawag na self-rated poverty, mas sumama pa. Noong 2009, ang self-rated poverty average for the whole year was 49%. Ito yung average score doon sa survey ng social weather stations where people were asked, are you poor? So sinasabi nila, 49% said they were poor.
Uh-huh.
It's not a very, it's as Senator Tata was saying, hindi naman eksaktong tama yon, pero yun yung pakiramdam ng tao. In 2012, which is the high growth year of this administration, 7% plus, the average self-rated poverty is 52%. Tumaas pa. You would think dapat bumaba dahil mas malakas yung growth, but in fact tumaas. So
Okay.
it shows that, despite the growth, hindi nararamdaman o hindi nakikita ng tao. Now, I'd like to, Melo, since we're talking about global events also, I'd like to touch on a few global events that I felt were crucial this year. No?
Okay. But, sandali lang.
Yeah.
Mamaya ng konti. Hold muna tayo. Archbishop Cruz, is there any difference between the previous administration with this administration? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel, or is it light coming from an upcoming train?
Frankly, I would like to ask the forgiveness of all those concerned for what I would say, because really it might be painful, but the truth is the truth. Yes, we can evaluate the year before, and we might also evaluate the year ahead. But to me, the greatest liability of the country today is its incompetent leadership. I am worried that from bad, it's going to worse. And while I do not necessarily associate malice with Malacanang, perhaps I'm not alone in seeking for more competence,
Mm-hmm.
for more logic and reason in leading the country. In short, there are so much liabilities, not only natural but also human. But again, I would like to say that with the leadership we have now,
Mm-hmm.
which is accidental, just like the father died, the mother became president, the mother died, the son became president. Come on. There must be something better than this.
Mm-hmm.
But I stop there.
Okay. Sige po, mamaya ng konti, tutuloy tayo. Bert, how bad is the transport situation in the country? May namatay na 21, kani-kanina lang doon sa Sakuna. Coming from LTFRB and LTO and from the Global Road Safety Partnership, is it still safe to travel in the Philippines?
Well, kagaya kaninang umaga, nagulantang tayo dahil merong isang bus na nahulog doon sa Skyway. Pangalawang beses na nangyari yan. The first one was about 2 years ago. No? Patuloy ang masakit, pero patuloy na mangyayari ito if the government does not address it properly, ng problema. Alam naman natin kung anong problema kung anong pinag-uugatan yan. Nag-uumpisa yan sa bad driving habits.
Okay.
At the way government addresses the problem, wala malayo doon sa kung paano dapat in-address it. Especially pagdating sa enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Ang record natin stands that ang average deaths daily is 34 deaths.
Is this in the Philippines?
Philippine scenario yan.
34 deaths
Daily.
a day.
So, ngayon, meron pa tayong balancing 14 before the day end.
Yes, yes. Hindi ordinaryo yung araw kung wala tayong nababasa sa dyaryo, nakikita sa TV o naririnig sa radyo na may banggaan, may nasagasaan. Extraordinaryong araw yun. But daily, we have a daily dosage of road crashes occurring anywhere in the Philippines. And many of that are not even reported. Take the case of this, yung nangyari nung Wednesday.
Road rage.
Hindi naman road rage yun. Lasing na empleyado ng Congress. Minaneho yung service vehicle ng Kongreso. Inararo yung Center Island dun sa Commonwealth. No? So, probably, paniwala niya, hindi pa in-effect yung RA 10586. No?
Sa drunk driving.
Oo.
Aha.
Mga ganun. Unless that is addressed by government, yung bad driving habits, yung mga road crashes na yan will continue.
Naku, delikado to. Ano pwedeng gawin?
First, of course, is enforcement.
Yes, pakikuha na po ng mikropono, Senator.
Meron daw 11 babaeng namamatay dahil sa pagbubuntis. Pumasa sila ng RH law, no? Na laban sa konsyensya ng lahat. Ito, kung 34 ang namamatay araw-araw sa aksidente, anong kailangan gawin ng pamahalaan?
Hindi na kailangan ng kondo.
Well, actually, ang biro nga ng iba, this is an effective measure on depopulation. 34 deaths daily.
Bad people.
But, ang tinitingnan pa rin natin dyan is yung enforcement. May mga lapses sa enforcement. Like for example, we only talk about yung mga speeding, yung mga swerving, yung mga ganyan. But then, hindi naman ginagawa ng paraan. Hindi ina-address. May nakikita tayong mga enforcers but they're not doing their job.
Okay.
So,
Maliwanag
tayo
yun.
doon. But of course, siguro, I don't know if Bishop
Cruz.
will agree with me. Tinitingnan din natin yung sitwasyon na magmula ng pagkabata ng mga driver na yun. Ano ba sila nung araw? Bakit mukhang hindi nila natutunan yung tinatawag nating GMRC?
Good manners and right conduct.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, please.
Bago natin iwan to, kasi importante. Sa ibang bansa, nakikita ko, sa highway, halimbawa, yung right lane at left lane, magkaiba yan. Pag ikaw nasa right lane, mabagal ang takbo mo. Yung sa left lane, ayun ang mabilis. Dito sa atin, wala. Yung kabaliktaran, sabihin, wala sa international standards ang ating
Senator, with malice towards none, it was Mar Rojas who promoted Padjak. Kaya dumami. Di po ba?
Well,
okay.
ibang issue. Salamat.
Iba issue. Okay. Can we ask Michael Billington, coming from the outside looking in, how do you look at the Philippine economy? Can we have your views on our 7% growth and how long will this be? Some people say there will be an economic bubble bursting within the next couple of years. How do you look at it, Michael?
I'm going to stand because I can't see half of the people.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
No problem.
I feel uncomfortable not seeing everybody here. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
I think you can only look at the situation in the Philippines or any other nation on earth in the context of the fact that we are now in the first stages of the worst financial collapse in the history of the human race. Mr. LaRouche, my organization's founder, Mr. LaRouche, has warned since the 1970s that the policies followed in the United States and London by Margaret Thatcher and others in the United States of taking down the policies of Franklin Roosevelt, which protected the people from the banks through a policy called Glass-Steagall, which guaranteed only the commercial banks that invested in the real economy and forbid those banks from speculating. And when the dollar was released from gold in 1971, LaRouche became very famous because he warned that was going to happen, and he warned this would lead to a global breakdown crisis. And when the Glass-Steagall Act, which separated the banks, was taken down in the 1990s, he said we are on the brink of a global depression, far worse than a depression, a global collapse, which would also lead to a global war, and that a war would be thermonuclear this time. We are now in that crisis. The transatlantic U.S.-European banking crisis is now totally bankrupt, is in a state of absolute panic. Mm-hmm. They have been printing money in the United States at the rate of $85 billion every month. They call this quantitative easing, to prop up the bankrupt banks. Those bankrupt banks, the big, large banks, which have been allowed to merge with the speculative banks in wild speculation, have been using this money to continue the speculation since the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008. And we now have a bigger bubble than we had at the time of the 2008 collapse, and that this is reaching a point of complete explosion and panic. This is also what's behind the very, very near threat of war, which we saw when they tried to invade Syria, and which would have led to a nuclear confrontation with Russia, and possibly also with China. This is the context in which the Philippines finds itself, like every other nation finds itself. We're in the brink of the worst collapse of history. And I'll add, and we can go into it later if you wish, there is a solution to this. It's the same solution Franklin Roosevelt had, which is to re-separate the banks, to let the investment banks collapse, and the derivative bubble and the speculation with it, and to restore what was once known as the American system, where we only invest in development. And to do that, America must link up with those nations that still believe in development, which is China and which is Russia. If we have that alliance committed to a new world financial system based on what was once called American system principles, unlike the British-style system now governing the United States, then we have a chance to survive. And I would simply say to close that the statement by Pope Francis last week is completely coherent with what Mr. LaRouche has warned for 40 years, which is that the reason the world is now in an existential crisis is because we have allowed our governments, and I would include this one, to be taken over not by sovereign leaders who believe in the dignity of humanity, but to be taken over by financial interests, what Pope Francis called the autonomy of the marketplace, not elected government, and the autonomy of speculative financial capital. This is what's threatening civilization, and which we can and must resolve in the very, very near term. We don't have much time, and this is why I'm here in Asia, actually.
Michael, let me ask you, the Philippines will soon be part of ASEAN in 2015, as the European Union has been in existence for years. Do you think we have a chance when we get to be a one community by 2015?
That won't happen, and thank God people now see what's happened to the EU. The EU is a straitjacket which has destroyed the sovereignty of European nations. No European nation has any sovereignty left. So now that we have this financial collapse, what's happening? Greece is being committed to genocide. And I use that word carefully. The people in Greece today will tell you the situation now is far, far worse than under Nazi occupation. People are dying in huge numbers because they're being denied health care, they've been left off their jobs. The unemployment amongst the youth in Greece is 60%, 6-0. There's no hope for the next generation. This is true in Spain, it's true increasingly in Italy, and all of Europe, and there's nothing they can do because they gave up their sovereignty to a group of bureaucrats in Brussels.
So we stand to benefit nothing.
The Cyprus model, which Senator Todd mentioned, is what they have in mind for every country, meaning that the next time a bank collapses, they're simply going to steal the deposits of the people who have money in that bank.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I'd just like him to apply that to what is happening to the Philippines. We've just had a 30% power rate increase on top of already a 90% overpriced power. But if it's happening to Greece now, it has been happening to the Philippines for the past decade now. Please elaborate for us.
There's two things.
You're just a tourist, right? You're not a permanent resident of the Philippines.
No,
right?
no, I'm a tourist. I live
You're a
in
tourist.
Washington,
Okay.
D.C.
No problem. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, chances are you may be deported. That's why. So go on with your views, please.
Well, I'll say two things briefly, which Mentong knows. Our organization, and I was involved in this, warned when you privatized your power sector, when you privatized Napacor, that this would lead to an absolute disaster. That energy, like other things, are the responsibilities of government because everything else depends on it. That's the role of a republic. Not a democracy in the simple sense, but a republic which takes responsibility for the citizens. And when you privatized Napacor, you allowed people whose only concern was maximizing profit to limit energy production in order to raise energy prices. So that you have this glorious nuclear power plant, which could have been the first nuclear power plant in Southeast Asia. And instead, it's sitting there mothballed. Korea, at the same time, built a similar nuclear power plant. They now have 30 and cheap energy.
Okay.
And here you've been destroyed.
Let me ask you, Michael. Much has been said by government of the private-public partnership. Do you think this will work in a setup that we have in the Philippines?
Now, that is that term public-private partnership is invented in order to justify the takeover of what should be sovereign policies, government policies to guarantee the benefit of the people by the private sector. And they put a nice name, public-private partnership. Under what was once called American system policies, the government took responsibility for not only owning the basic infrastructure, including power and water and roads and schools and hospitals, and of course they contracted private sector interests to participate in great projects. So the private sector benefited, but it was not run by the private sector because it was something which was meant for the population, not for profit. And the profit for the private corporations came from being contracted to the government.
Okay.
We have to return to this very quickly or we are facing disaster, as you know here and as we know in the United States. I will just add one thing for the Philippines to know. People think perhaps the conditions in the Philippines or in Europe are disastrous, but America is in a little bit of a recovery. We're not in a recovery. Only the banks have recovered because the money has been put there. People may think there's no starvation in America. There's mass starvation in America. And this government has just cut the so-called food stamps, which is the only help for basic food for the poor. And we're seeing in Detroit and other cities that the pensions of our workers who've given their life and worked all their lives and have a pension, which is theirs, is being stolen from them by this bankruptcy process against municipalities. We're facing a social disaster there as we are in Europe. And it's
Okay.
important that people here know that because this must be reversed.
Yes. Thank you. You may now
One
take your seat.
question, One
Yes,
question
please.
before you go, Michael. You're talking of FDR, no? Bringing back the policies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt to solve the present financial collapse. Okay? It worked because this was an exercise of political power against the banks, against the investment banks. Right now, your problem is, it is the banks that are in control of government. So, where do you begin?
It's absolutely true. And that's exactly what Pope Francis said, is
This
that
is
the
the
banks
problem.
are in charge of government. The solution
The
is
corporate
only,
world is in control.
it's only the Glass-Steagall bill that I mentioned, which forcefully takes on the banks and breaks up the speculators from the commercial banks and no government support for the speculators. What does that mean? It means Wall Street will collapse, and good riddance.
But who will do this? They are the ones.
We have, you're right, Obama's not going to
Dictating
do it.
everything.
In fact, Obama will veto it. Obama has to be removed. He has to be removed by impeachment or forcing him out of office. It's a long story, but I will say briefly that because of Obama's effort to start a war in Syria, which was stopped by the head of our military, who said you may not, by our organization, which helped mobilize the population to prevent the Congress from approving it, when Obama was forced finally to go to the Congress. Since that time, some of the better minds in our administration, some of the better people in the Democratic leadership, including John Kerry and the Secretary of Defense Hagel, and even the Vice President Joe Biden, who were kissing Obama's rear end for his whole first term, have begun to recognize that we're facing a complete disaster and have begun to act independently, which is why we found the solution in Iran, and it's why when both Joe Biden and Hagel came here to Asia, they calmed down the effort to provoke a war with China over this air defense identification zone. These are people who are beginning to act independently. And in our Congress, we now have 80 co-sponsors for the Glass-Steagall bill. You won't read that in the newspapers. They don't talk about the Glass-Steagall fight. But this is real. It's happening. People are aware that the nation's being destroyed and that only taking on Wall Street can succeed. And I agree with Senator Todd. If we don't do that, we cannot succeed.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, Mentong, please use the microphone for brevity.
One of the reasons why I don't come very often is because I interrupt too much, as you know. But this is too important, and Michael is leaving on Thursday, which is very sad, because more of the public should hear him. But on the question of the control of the bankers, which is also the case in the Philippines, Glass-Steagall, the the restoration of Glass-Steagall, is it sufficient? I may be getting ahead of the discussion, but ultimately, shouldn't money be nationalized? Shouldn't banking really be nationalized?
And isn't that asking for the moon?
No,
Yes.
well, you're right and you're wrong. It's not possible or necessary to nationalize the entire banking system. But the financial system derived by our founding fathers, Hamilton and others, was not the central bank idea that we have today. What you have in Europe, what you have in the Philippines, and what we have in America in the Federal Reserve is a group of private bankers called the central bank who have power over the economy. Our Constitution forbids that. It says only the elected officials in the Congress can have control over the currency. But we've allowed our Constitution to be undermined. We need to return to the idea of national banking, not central banking, but national bank owned by the government, which can issue credit in its own name, not by borrowing it from the private bankers, as long as that money is not really money but credit. That the national bank issues credit through the private banking system, which has strings attached. You can't use it to go build a casino or a whorehouse. You have to use it to upgrade the productivity of the people, to do the general welfare. This is the way Roosevelt did it even without having a national bank, using the disaster of the Depression and the war to basically impose those kinds of policies. Today, we have to wipe out this central banking system and have a national bank to go back to what was once called the credit system rather than the monetary system. Then we can generate the credit for big development projects, great infrastructure, to work with those countries, like I said, China and Russia, to work together to build a tunnel under the Bering Strait, great water projects, infrastructure, high rail, nuclear power, fusion power especially. These are the ideas which must inspire our youth who now have no future, but which have to have this vision of leaders, true leaders. And again, I say that the problem of leadership here and in America and elsewhere is the key issue. Leaders who, like Jack Kennedy, was the last great leader in America, inspired people to the future, to think about the future.
So, Archbishop, let me ask you, are you of the opinion that we have the right leaders or have we elected dealers into office? You know, Michael said it's important for us to have leaders. So, do you think we have the right leaders today or have we elected dealers instead?
For one thing, when you talk of election, that is the least credible exercise we have in the country. Election, my foot.
Uh-huh. But we have modernized. We already have the PICOs. Are you not satisfied with it?
What I'm saying is that I am of the firm belief that democracy and poverty cannot go hand in hand.
Medyo critical yan. Bakit po?
When people are poor, they are not free.
Uh-huh.
That's why last election, quote-unquote election, there were a lot of both sellers and also both buyers. And I was asked, what can you say about those who sell their boats? I said, if I am a family man who barely have enough or even less than enough salary to feed my family, you mean to say I will not sell my boat? Why? Am I a martyr?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning to say, poor and freedom are not partners. That's why if there is poverty in the country and there is a lot of it in the Philippines, then for heaven's sake, let us not talk of democracy because there is none.
Archbishop, sinasabi rin po naman na yung daang matuwid nangyayari sapagkat kung walang korap, walang mahirap.
Yung daw matuwid na daan, ang tuloy ay sa kanal.
Bakit po?
Alam niyo po, nag-umpisa yung matuwid na daan na yan. Ewan ko, nung araw magandang pakinggan, but as time passes by, it has become a big joke, you know? Meaning to say, as I said before, the incompetence of leadership cannot maintain the taboo of graft and corruption in the country. That's why, even to this date, graft and corruption is a standard practice. And by the way, honest, I pity the Filipino people. How they suffer, how much taxes are taken from them from birth to death, direct and indirect. And all of a sudden, here are our government officials having the pork barrel, the pig barrel, I do not know what else. And here we are. So, I'm sorry, but that is the way I see things.
Yeah. Bago ko i-recognize muli si Mintong, I'd like to inform everybody that we also invited Secretary Coloma to join us today. But he begged off, his staff begged off because of conflict in his schedule. Sabi ng sekretarya niya, wag lang daw kami magsawa kaiimbita, baka tumama rin. So we will be sending him invitations. We also invited a member of the LEDAC, si Attorney Miguel Varela of the PCCI, but he failed to come. Yes, Mento.
Yeah, okay. As you know, I always try to ask the most difficult question. And I think what we have seen is the real ugly and evil entity in this society. Beyond the evil and corrupt politicians are the evil and corrupt monopoly finance capitalists. I refer to Manny Pangilinan. We never hold there are no holds barred here. And he is the one behind the power rate hike now and the conspiracy behind it. And since I don't hide anything, I'll say this. In a colloquium with Justice Puno, months back, maybe 8 months back, we also had Bishop Tobias join us. And so yes, Bishop Tobias was very happy. We discussed the ills of the society, corruption, and so on. And since one of the topics in the discussion was electricity, he said, yes, this is really very bad, this electricity. Everybody's suffering from it. But one of the panelists reminded him, Bishop, one of the biggest contributors to the church is Manny Pangilinan. Bishop Tobias kept quiet after that.
And so the question is?
The question is the church, you're now retired, so you're not tied to the bureaucracy of the church. But can we have church members lambast these Lopezes, Pangilinans, because the evil is persons. Politicians, we know, they're part of the system. But what is the prop of this system? It is a monopoly finance capital. From our overpricing of water to electricity and so on. The people and the constituency of the church is the real victim in all these.
Yes, Archbishop, please.
The church, the Christian faith has two dimensions. One is perpendicular, the other is horizontal, which makes the sign of the cross. The perpendicular is about man and God, God and man. That is the perpendicular relationship. And that is a very comfortable matter to discuss. Very beneficial. Very peaceful when you talk about God, about God's goodness, forgiveness, greatness, power, authority. Yes, they're all true. And that perpendicular preaching is, as I said, not only easy, not only peaceful, but also beneficial. Now, the moment you go to the horizontal dimension of man and man, be careful, because this is where you get enemies. When you talk about God, loving God, no problem there. But the moment you talk about man loving man, there is a big problem there. Because man loving man is not a question of feeding him when hungry, clothing him when naked. It is also coming to his assistance when he is oppressed, when he is a victim of whatever government, private or public enterprises. And that is the social doctrine of the church. And among us, that is one thing we do not dare touch, because then we incur enemies. And that's the time when we have people talking like anything else about us. But the moment we stay here, everything is safe, everything is nice, everything is okay. But the moment we go here, which is the social doctrine of the church, which is considered the best kept secret in the world, because it talks of human rights, it talks of economy, industry, development, you name it. We do not usually touch that because it is dangerous. You incur enemies. There are people who you step on.
Archbishop, do you think Pope Francis is that way? He's not worried of making enemies?
Now that you ask, I'm going to tell you. This man is a gift of God to the church and to the world these times. We need a pope like this, who's not afraid to preach about man and man, who does not stop in just God and man, but who speaks about man and man, and he talks in such a way that does not make people angry, no?
Mm-hmm.
Which is to me a talent. But for example, let the church have her feet
On the ground.
the ground and mud on the shoes, etc., etc. Bring the church to the slums, etc., etc. Yes, this is the man that we need for today. And I hope most of us bishops will be able to get something out of this man, that we will not talk only about the perpendicular, but also the horizontal, because the horizontal and the perpendicular, that is what makes the Christian faith. It is just one half.
Okay, very well said. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, I'm Dan Pasha from the Green Pen. Before I go to my question to the Honorable Bishop, of course the word honorable belongs to the politician, but Your Excellency, let me just reappraise the 6 millennium issues issued by the UN at the turn of the century. In the magazine Our Planet, the UN General Assembly mentioned that for the next 1,000 years, there are 6 issues we have to address.
And these are?
And they are forest, water, waste, soil, climate, species. And I agree with the UN.
Okay.
And we never listen. That's why for the last 12 years, puro disaster, puro baha, puro
Okay.
parusa ang inaabot natin.
Okay.
And we do not listen to the spirits.
Okay.
Well, if you call God a spirit that rules the 6 millennia issues or millennium issues, then let be it. As John Lennon said,
Imagine.
talking of God, let there be no religion. Imagine there's no religion.
Okay.
Because he is saying that because of religion, it is a factor that allows people to kill people. Like those guys who train in Manila to fly 747. They shouted, Allah Akbar, before
Okay.
they destroyed and killed 3,000 people.
Okay. Question.
Listen to the American Indians. Listen to the people of the mountains before. Meron silang, ang Diyos nila nasa puno,
Okay.
nasa mga bato. You see, I guess we have to,
All right.
to make a balance. No?
No problem.
Do we have the power to make the balance?
Okay. So, yun ang tanong. Sige. Maganda pag-usapan yan. Palagay ko mas masinsin ang usapan yan. All right. Let me just ask Secretary Saludo. You're also an economist. You also look at the way things are. Pero is inclusive growth impossible at this point in time?
Well, we've been efforts to try and extend the benefits of growth to more people. And there are countries that have succeeded. And we should really try to take a page from their example. One of them is Vietnam. They have reduced their poverty rate from higher than the Philippines, close over 50%. Now it's down to below 20%. Indonesia has also done similarly. Now, of course, you can still say that there is much inequality in these places. China too has also shown great reduction in poverty, although the inequality now is growing because the growth of the country is going mainly to the cities. Pero meron namang nagawa, no? And it behooves both not just the government but the wealthier classes in our society to see how these countries did it. Meron namang mga nakagawa nito. Sri Lanka, among other examples, they have a literacy rate that rivals among even the developed countries, even though they are less affluent than the Philippines. So may mga nagagawa. I mean, I'm sure these places are not perfect. So there are ways of doing it. And I guess at the same time, looking at the example of the church, it's also not just systems. I mean, we always want to think you have to do it through a system, but there also needs to be a change of heart. Kailangan din na yung mga nasa kapangyarihan, nasa magandang katayuan, isipin din nila yung mga hindi nakaririwasa, yung mga walang kapangyarihan. You cannot just depend on laws and systems and policies. There has to be also a change in the heart of people. And that's another area na siguro kailangan ding tingnan. No?
Okay. Mentong, sige na, may tatanong ako dito sa apat bago ko tanungin si Bert mamaya.
Si Melo was looking at me with trepidation. But I want again to go back to what Mike said, the power issue, which also related to the water issue, public infrastructure, and so on. And I will also address it to the technocrat from the Arroyo administration. The performance-based rate on electricity started under the Arroyo administration in 2005. That was the same year that poverty started to climb in this country. Now, so it is of utmost importance for the media and everybody else, the intelligentsia that kitata doubts exist in this country, to focus on the right issues. Now, this just to highlight, this power issue. Vietnam's power, I just calculated 2 days ago for my article. It is surprisingly 1,500 dong per kilowatt hour. But $1 is 21,800 dong. When you translate that, that is 3 pesos 17 centavos per kilowatt hour. To our today, with this 4 peso 15 centavos and probably 50 centavos, 4 pesos 50 centavos increase, we are at 16 pesos 50 cents per kilowatt hour.
Okay.
Then we hear about growth from Gloria Arroyo's time to today. But GDP is really growing. And forget the pun, but the correct definition of GDP is gross domestic pain. Every time they increase electricity, that goes into GDP. Every time they increase the charge for water, that goes to GDP. But they still boast of our GDP growth. Now, final point. But do you know that because of the electricity rate in Vietnam of 3 pesos 17, 14 centavos equivalent per kilowatt hour, their foreign direct investment is $19.5 billion as of October 2013. And the Philippines is boasting of its foreign direct investment as of September 2013 of $3.5 billion.
Okay.
That translates to industries, that translates to jobs, that translates to alleviation of poverty. And there are no other issues more important today and for the next year except this electricity.
All right. To add to that, by June 30, Samsung already invested $1 billion in Vietnam. And by August, a group of Korean investors came to Manila and I asked them, why did you settle in Vietnam? And he said, we were there last year and we were convinced that the electric power rates are much better and cheaper, notwithstanding labor costs. Okay, so they're now there. And according to Samsung, they brought about 200 small and medium businesses to go with their plant. Can you imagine the multiplier effect? Okay.
Yeah, habol lang. So, Bishop, maybe you are the Francis of this country. Okay, but think of the children who need electricity to read for their class the next day, and so on. And I cannot stress it any more than what I'm trying to do now, Bishop.
Okay. Archbishop, please react to it. And next question will come from Sol Bansi.
The way I see it, when public utilities are privatized, that is a mortal sin against the general public. Public utilities are precisely for the use of the general public that pays all the taxes precisely to pay for the utilities. For heaven's sake, why is it that such a public utility as a road will have to exact toll payments? It's public utility built by public funds that come from the public, general public. The same. Water is a public utility. All of a sudden, there is a private enterprise who took over. That is for profit. Public utilities are meant for the welfare of the public and their common good, not for the profit of corporations and enterprises. The same with electricity. For heaven's sake, do you know when a baby is born and he uses electricity, he starts to pay indirect taxes. When he uses water, when the baby uses powder, cotton, alcohol, when the baby is a little bigger, drinks milk, etc., the baby pays indirect taxes. To me, this is, I'm sorry I have to use the word, this is criminal. But my blood boils. Do you know that when a family who barely has something to eat will buy a can good as sardines, for example, or anything, soft drink, they have to pay indirect tax.
Okay.
When children go to eat to a fast food, they have to pay indirect tax. That's why I tell my friends, go to slow food. Baka walang tax.
Okay. Archbishop, are you telling us that we live in miserable times and that the best movie or Broadway to represent us is Les Miserables? Ganun po ba yun?
Ay, ewan ko sa inyo.
Sol, please.
My question really is on utilities. Slowly, nakita ng generation natin na biglang-bigla, kukonting pangalan lang ang nandyan na may-ari ng lahat ng utilities. Sa game ng Monopoly ba tayo nandun o nasa real world na dapat bawal na ang isang pamilya o isang entity, kanya lahat yung utilities? Sa ibang bansa, bawal yon. Tapos, ang isa pa, dito lang yata yung, siya na yung retailer ng electricity under one company. The same family that owns another company generates electricity which is sold to the family's retailing company.
Uh-huh.
Paano nangyari yan? Tsaka mababago pa ba natin yan?
So ang tanong mo rin, in short,
Mababago pa ba natin yan?
anyari? Ano nangyari? Sino kaya sasagot dito sa mga panauhin natin? There's an information that 2% of the Filipino population own about 80% of the economy. There's a study that says that.
Dati, nung panahon ng right after the war, nangyayari lang yan, nasasabi ang ganyang figures sa pag-aari ng lupa at kayamanan.
Uh-huh.
Ngayon, sa lahat na.
Okay. Senator Tata, meron bang mali sa batas? Kaya halos yun na rin ang pangalan sa utilities? Then let's ask Rick Salud about it. Senator.
Hindi lang batas ang mali. I mean, the whole system is wrong. Yung social system, dapat talaga pag-aralan nating lahat yan. Yung tanong ni Mentong kanina, na bakit yung mga taong simbahan hindi magsalita tungkol sa isyong ito, lahat po tayo taong simbahan eh. We all belong to the church. Pero problema nga po, unang-una, pag nagsalita kayo, gusto niyo magsalita, paano kayo maririnig ng iba? Through the media, no? Sino may-ari ng media? Yung babanatan mo. Okay. Yung may control. No? Pero kailangan po magkaroon talaga ng independent body of intellectuals. Meron tayong intellectual community. Sa ibang bansa, kahit na yung mga partido, mga iba-ibang grupo ay naglalaban-laban, magkakaiba ang posisyon, matitindi ang away. Pag yung boses po, yung tinig po ng intellectual community, independyente po yan, yan ang nagbibigay ng liwanag sa lahat. Ay wala po tayo niyan. Marami po tayong kasama, nagsusulat, nagsasalita, at lahat sila mahal natin. Pero ang totoo po, karamihan chismis, no? Okay. Hindi po nakararating doon sa mga talagang malalalim na issue na dapat pag-usapan. Okay. At masaya sila pag halimbawa nainis nila si Pinoy, no? Napagtawanan nila si Pinoy. Masaya na sila, mukhang mission accomplished na. Hindi po eh. Kasi yung matitinding problema, dapat po suriin natin ng maigi para makita natin nasaan ang solusyon dito sa mga issue ito. Okay. So, hindi lang po regime change ang kailangan natin ngayon, kundi systems change. No? Yung mga fundamental issues tungkol sa unang-una, paano ba nagkakaroon ng lipunan sa balat ng lupa? No? How does a society emerge? Paano ginagawa ito? Yung ekonomiya, anong klaseng ekonomiya ba ang nararapat para yung human dignity ay talagang lumitaw at mapagsilbihan? So, the fundamental issues are not being discussed. Yung economic, socio-economic planning sa pamahalaan, hindi po pinag-uusapan eh. At yung progress, pag pinag-usapan, puro material lang ang lumilitaw. Okay. Pesos and cents, okay ka. Oo. Pero beyond that, walang moral context.
Okay.
Ang usapan. Oo. Kaya kahit na anong kababuyan ang lumitaw, basta kumikita, ayos na.
Very well. Maliwanag po. Secretary Saludo, how would you react to that? What's wrong? Is it the executive? Is it the laws? Saan ba nandun ang problema?
Siguro babalik lang ako doon sa tanong tungkol sa kuryente. No?
Sa utilities.
Yun yata yung pinagmula ng katanungan. No? Ang ipinasang batas ay ang hangarin nga huwag magkaroon ng labis na pagkukumpul ng pag-aari sa iba't ibang sektor ng kuryente. No? At lalo pa, ang pinaghiwalay dyan, yung generating sector, yung gumagawa ng kuryente, no? Yung transmission sector na ngayon ay nasa ilalim ng National
Grid
Transmission
Corporation.
Oo. National Grid. At saka yung mga distribution company, dyan pumapatak ang Meralco. No? At merong paghahating ginawa dyan. At ito siguro pwede pang pahusayin upang siguruhin na walang labis na nakikinabang. But the key challenge really in the country is how to ensure adequate electricity at a competitive price. Yan pa rin. No? That will still be the primary challenge to the country. Mas mahalaga pa yon, I have to say, than who gets rich and who doesn't. No? Of course, it's related to certain monopolies, but that has to be addressed. And kaya ho kailangang aksyonan yan, dalawang bagay. Una, the most expensive electricity is no electricity. Okay, keep that in mind. The most expensive electricity is no electricity. Pero dahil ang mga kababayan, mga syudad po natin na hindi nagkakaroon ng kuryente, wala po silang mapagkukunan ng industriya nila. So that is one issue that has to be looked at, no? And we can debate this, but of course not at this venue, no?
Okay.
Pangalawa, the other big issue, no? Meron po tayong mga kakumpetensyang ekonomiya sa iba yung dagat, no? And the competition with the international competition in industry, lalo pa po itong lalakas. Nabanggit ni Melo kanina yung ASEAN 2015, ano? Hindi pa naman todo unified market tayo sa 2015, pero darating din po 'yan, no? And so as we unify with ASEAN, and not only ASEAN, ang atin yung pong ASEAN Free Trade Area, meron din yang agreement with Japan, with China, eventually with other countries. Ibig sabihin yung pong ating merkado ay magiging mas competitive dahil yung mga protection na dating pinaiiral sa bansa, mawawala na po yan. We also saw recently the latest World Trade Organization deal that was concluded sa Bali. No? The direction of all this is greater openness in the markets. At isa pong liability po ng Pilipinas, napakamahal po ng ating kuryente, which makes our industries very uncompetitive. No? I mean, I'm not saying anything that our policymakers do not know.
Okay.
No? So, punto ko lang, ultimately, the more urgent thing is really to find a way to address the supply of power and the cost. No? How that is done, and how that is related to the monopolies, well, of course, policymakers will have a lot on their hands to address this.
Okay.
Pero ito yung matimbang na hamon po sa atin, and the time is running out because the opening up of global markets will put pressure on our industries the way it was pressuring us already before.
All right.
Okay, it was already pressuring us before, it will be so even more. Thank you.
I heard PCCI say that, ECOP say that 30 to 40% of production costs come from power and fuel. So pagtaas ng fuel, pagtaas ng power, problema tayo. Tataas ang presyo. 30 to 40%. Yes, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Juvie de Guzman of DWBL. Medyo hindi lang ako aware dun sa ibang napag-usapan, pero sorry po. Humabol po ako. I just want to ask Archbishop Oscar Cruz. Sir, gusto ko lang pong alamin, actually hindi naman po ako masyadong sa religion, no? Hindi po religion ang pinag-uusapan, pero po yung akin lang napansin, kasi biktima ako ng masyadong traffic every time na merong malaking nagaganap na okasyon ang INC, no? Gusto ko lang pong alamin, baka may rule, no? Kasi nagugulat po ako, parang walang sistema sa trapiko, sa mga kung ano-anong nangyayari. Ang akin lang naman po, yung pagiging concern ko, sang-ayon dun sa mga concern din, nagtatanong sa akin.
Okay.
Not because of any religion. Ang gusto ko lang, Bishop Cruz, meron ba tayong ginagawang rule ng mga religious sector na nagpapatupad ng mga
Activities.
Activities na hindi yata concern yung mga tao na walang system. Yung ganun po ba? Meron po bang nagko-control? Or kung wala man, gusto ko lang pong malaman para po maipahayag ko rin din sa mga taong nagtatanong sa akin. Thank you.
Archbishop.
Ang sagot po niyan, yung traffic mismo. Yung mga traffic officials, sila po ang dapat mamahala dyan para sa ganon yung gawain ay huwag maging hadlang sa pangkaraniwang buhay ng tao. So kung minsan nga po, medyo yung mga hindi lang naman sa trapiko, kundi yung mga taong simbahan din, anumang klaseng panampalataya. Kung minsan talagang yung kanilang fervor ay masyadong lumalakas at nakakalimot na maraming taong naabala sa kanilang ginagawa. Pero sa kabilang parte rin po, yung traffic officials, kailangan din naman pangalagaan nila at gawin nila yung kanilang tungkulin. So, in short, pareho po may kamalian, may kakulangan.
Okay.
Maraming salamat. Follow up lang, sir. Sir, last na po.
Please.
Kasi po si Engineer Alberto Swansing po, isa po sa kilala nating dating namamahala ng LTFRB, right?
Saka LTO.
LTO. At kasama ko po siya sa RCI, Rotary Club of Intramuros. I'm so proud of him kasi nung time niya, nakikita ko talagang laganap yung sistema, no? Nagulat lang po ako, Engineer Swansing. Ano po ba yung, kasi 2030 na ngayon, so we need some improvement, no? Sa nakikita natin, alam natin maraming changes na dapat mangyari. At it is about time na tulungan natin yung gobyerno. Whatever the problem
tanong mo
is.
siguro dyan,
Ang tanong ko lang po, ano po ba ang karaniwang problema sa LTO? Parang wala hong naayos, walang nabago. Yung naiwan po ninyo. Salamat po.
Bert, tanong ko na rin,
At most.
bakit walang plaka yung mga bagong sasakyan?
Uy, tama ka dyan, sir.
Bakit lalagay mo improvised plate, pag nasagasaan ka, hindi mo makikita halos?
Ayan.
Ano ba kasaysayan ng kababayan niyo ba yun?
At saka ito po ba'y natural na pamamaraan na nagbabayad ka ng prangkisa na wala kang resibo at plate number ka na
Dilaw ang plaka mo na wala kang prangkesa.
walang
Yun
prangkisa.
ang ibig mo sabihin,
Yun
paano
po.
i-renew?
Baliktad. Yes, sir. Thank
Bert,
you.
Paano ba marirenew yun? Pag yellow plate pero walang prangkisa?
Systemic ang problema kagaya na nabanggit ni former Senator Kitata, yung sistema. Yung tungkol sa plaka, yung mga ganyan, imbis na nag-improve sana, sumama pa, no? Dahil unang-una pinakialaman yung procurement system. Yung procurement system ng plaka dapat sa LTO lang yan. Ang ginawa ng DOTC, dinala nila sa DOTC. So, nagkagulo. No? Yung tungkol naman sa prangkisa, yung palagi na lang may issue ng colorum. Again, enforcement ang problema dyan. Ano? Na hindi masyadong nasusundan ng pamahalaan itong mga bagay na ito. Yung kaguluhan sa ating kalsada ngayon is, dala nga kanina kagaya na sinabi ko, yung lapses sa enforcement. Meron tayong mga batas na dapat sinusunod ng ating mga mamamayan, ng mga drivers, pero sa kasamaang palad, ang tingin ng mga drivers sa mga batas natin, joke. No? Suggestion, pwedeng labagin. Yun ang problema. So, ang katupat noon is enforcement. Yung maayos na pagpapatupad ng mga batas.
Okay. Yes, please.
Follow up lang doon. Ernie Reyes po sa interaction.com ng TV5. Kay Mr. Swansea. Sino yung kumuha ng procurement program ng plakas from the LTO to the OTC? It's an order, memorandum order, or whatever. But ano po?
As far as you know.
Sa aking kakaalam, noong panahon ni Secretary Mar Rojas na siya nagpapatakbo ng DOTC, they decided na lahat ng mga procurement ng mga iba't ibang ahensya, hindi lang naman LTO, no, LTFRB, kundi lahat ng ahensya under DOTC, pagka yun ay tumaas ng 50 million, dinadala na sa taas sa DOTC na ginagawa.
Bakit, sir? Ano daw rational nung kanilang...
Polisiya nila yun. Polisiya nila yun. Palagi ko, isang dahilan is hindi nila pagkakatiwalaan yung mga ahensya.
Kano po kaya yung involved na, o ilan yung plakang involved? So per year, per registration year, or whatever?
Per registration year, umaabot sa mga almost 400,000 vehicles yan.
Magkano po isang plaka?
Siguro around 400 pesos din.
400 pesos. So may kumikita sa taas?
Hindi natin masasabi kung may kumikita sa taas. No? But then, yun nga, merong mga, ang nakikita ko dyan is merong mga paglabag doon sa DBM. Ano? Dahil kasi nga, ang budget is sa ahensya, hindi sa departamento. So dapat ang nagpapabid o ang gumagawa ng procurement, yung ahensya, hindi yung departamento.
Di ba violation to ng auditing rules and regulation na Congress allotted a certain amount to LTO, dapat sila yung mismong sabi nga sinabi nyo, diba, line item ito eh. So there's a violation of the GAA. On that part.
Meron ako nakikitang violation doon. Ano? But
hindi pa nila
nakikita siguro.
Hindi pa nakikita ngayon.
So, yung mga bureaucrats or technocrats dun sa taas ng DOTC, hindi nila nalalaman yung violation nila. Can we say that?
I will not say that, dahil kasi unang-una, top heavy ngayon ng legal minds ang DOTC. Mag-umpisa sa sekretaryo hanggang dun sa mga ilang undersecretaries yun na puro abogado.
So, hanggang ngayon, sir, ganun pa rin?
Hanggang ngayon.
And until kasi nakita ko yung DOTC budget Senate, naka-line item every, So kung kukunin ng Office of the Secretary yung procurement ng LTO, there's a violation on the GAA itself.
Meron.
Okay. May tanong yata si Butch Valdez. Butch?
I just wanted to, since the question was raised about traffic and so on, immediately what came to my mind is just what the good bishop had just mentioned about the criminal nature of privatizing public utilities. Probably not just criminal, and I would add that the stupidity of privatizing public utilities, where the public should be the principal beneficiary of government's use of public utilities.
Yes.
Now, and that in this particular case, transportation being one of them, obviously the present leadership and the previous leadership, not just the immediately before him and the rest of them, obviously did not have the vision necessary to anticipate this infrastructural need to address the moving of people to and fro areas of work and residence. Okay, and this is the principal nature. Not for us to be discussing this whether or not certain rules will have to be followed on the micro. Now, my question is addressed to the good Senator Kit Tapatan. Good Senator, you were a senator, you were in the legislature, and you have been rubbing elbows, I suppose, with the country's leadership for some time now. Is there nobody, no person that you can see in the inventory of leaders that we've had in the past and the present that has the vision precisely to address the need of the population with regard to these things? We have been bandied around by concepts of free market and promises that everything's going to be all right, but obviously this is not going to happen. Now, I want to ask that question of the good senator.
Okay. So, kung ipaparaphrase ko yon, may nakikita ba kayong Messiah? Ganun ba yun? Tama.
We have all the problems imaginable, Boots. But I don't think we should sell ourselves short. Ang problema lamang, when we talk of sino ang maaari, sino ang pwede, you always refer to those who are already there in the mainstream. No? Kailangan siguro, you have to undertake a deep search. First, you have to lay down the basic propositions. Anong klaseng tao ang kailangan natin? We define criteria. And then who knows? Maybe from within this room, yung hinahanap po dito makikita. No? Maybe the one who just spoke to us. Di ba? Francis of the Philippines.
Okay.
No, but I think we have to start with the basic propositions. Ito ba pwede? Pwede na dahil nakikita na natin, pinag-uusapan na, mayroong media promotion every day. When we talk of popularity, for instance, let's redefine that term. When we talk of popularity in this country, we are talking of someone na nakikita mo sa media. Nakabilad. No? Pero, meron na bang sinabi yan, a single idea na pinakinabangan ng bayan? Meron na bang ginawa yan na nakatulong sa lahat? I think this should be the basic questions to determine kung sino ang tuturingin mong popular o katanggap-tanggap.
At kapani-paniwala.
At kapani-paniwala. So, yeah, yung ating consultations booths may produce that name.
Yes, Archbishop.
No. Ako po ay talagang pumapalakpak pag binabasa ko ang ating konstitusyon. For example, the Constitution says that for the office of the President, he or she should be 45 years old, 10 years a citizen, resident of the country, a voter, and who should know how to read and write on election. Hindi ko naman minamaliit yung ganun, pero ako, I think, can't we demand more? Come on. Wala na. Kayo nagsabi niya, na? I don't know, but there must be something more to it because even elementary school teachers know more than how to read and write. That's all I'd like to say.
Okay. Yes, please, Michael.
Yes. I'm afraid I don't speak Tagalog, so I don't know everything.
Yes, okay. Coming from the outside looking in, that would be better, okay?
But I do want to say that I agree completely with Senator Tatat that the question of leadership is a question of an idea for the future, a program. It's not just somebody who's a strong person and can get his ideas through. It's that you have to have a concept for the future. And I had the honor earlier this year, I think people know that my friend Butch Valdez, the head of the Philippines LaRouche Society, which is the co-thinker of my international organization, founded a group called Save the Nation. And I had the honor of attending that meeting earlier this year, as did Archbishop Cruz and Senator Tatat. And I think the most important message from the Save the Nation movement is not just they have what they call 3 principles to save the nation. It's not any one of those or even a combination per se, but the idea that we have to take on the whole system, as again Senator Tatat said. The system is broken. The system in the United States and Europe is broken. We can't fix that system. It's bankrupt. We're talking about $1 quadrillion. Think for a moment what $1 quadrillion in derivative gambling debts, sucking the lifeblood out of our nations, extracting the wealth that should be invested in the advancement of the human people in these nations to pay off these gamblers, these speculators. And the program put forward by the Save the Nation movement is to address the energy crisis, for instance, by a vision of the future, nuclear power development, plunge ahead with science, something that can inspire our youth to long-term physical solutions, not just the manipulation, but the physical building of man's scientific capacities to build a nuclear future for all mankind, both in terms of power and what other things can be done with advanced science. When we push forward the frontiers of human knowledge, it affects everything in our society. And to deal at the same time with the underlying disaster in your country and every country on earth, which is this massive debt that has been built up entirely artificially, built up by the manipulation of your currency, so that you had the devaluation of your currency and suddenly you had to pay your old debts back 3 times over in terms of your local currencies. You have to solve that by saying, we will not do it. You have to have the courage that Argentina had to say, we will not pay artificial debts that are not our responsibility.
Okay.
And to go ahead with a fight to feed the people by having scientific technology for food. These are the 3 points. But the overriding thing is we have to have the willingness to identify the disaster of what's befalling mankind as a whole. And I will add one other point. Please watch what's happening in Ukraine very, very carefully, because Ukraine had the courage to say They want us to join the European Union. And yet the European Union is dying. It's a corpse. Greece, Spain, Italy, they're being destroyed. They're asking us to be destroyed along with them, and we will not do it. We're going to look to where there is still the belief in progress. And where is that? It's to Eurasia, it's to Russia, it's to China, it's to Japan and Korea. It's the idea of the development of the Pacific Basin. This is the focal point of development in the world as a whole, and by orienting towards that in Ukraine and here, then we have the potential of bringing nations out of this controlled environment in which they're being destroyed systematically and build, in fact, a new world which is based on sovereignty of nations and collaboration on great development projects. So this is our focus, and I just add that.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of leaders in the country.
Sige, go ahead with your question. Sige na.
Kay Secretary Saludo. Sir, as Secretary ng Cabinet, tanong ko lang po kung nagpe-present ba ng FYIs ang ERC sa Cabinet, mga pending petitions, whatever, regarding the energy power rates increase.
The Energy Regulatory Commission is a quasi-judicial body independent of the President. The President cannot overrule it. The only way you can overrule it is through the Court of Appeals. So hindi po yan under sa Cabinet. Even though it is attached to the Department of Energy. So it, precisely to avoid being politicized by the executive branch, it rules on its own. Ngayon, of course, katakot-takot na pakiusapan yan, and also efforts by the utility companies to reach out to them as well as the consumer groups, but it rules on its own. So, sa pagkaalam ko sa gabinete, sa pagkagunita ko, ilang beses lang yan nag-present. And it was only more if there was some really serious problem, but even then, we could not overrule it. It makes its decision on its own. Yan po, that is the way it's constituted under the law. So it can only be appealed not to the President, but to the Court of Appeals. And the appeal will only focus on legal issues. You cannot question the decision of the body unless there were some factual mistake, no? Yung factual mistake.
How about collusion?
Well, if you can prove it, yeah. If there was corruption, then you have to show proof, no? And that proof will be presented not to the President or the Cabinet, sa sa Court of Appeals.
Okay.
Then they will do their inquiry into the allegation.
Pero yung banner na inquirer ngayon, Dukot is the conduit ng pork barrel. Parang ano ba ang scenario?
She was once a congresswoman, that's why. Sinayda Dukot was a congressman of the district where Lubao is. Okay.
So yun po yung tanong mo tungkol doon. Ngayon,
so walang magagawa yung Office of the President or the Cabinet itself doon sa impending increase.
Ang ginagawa po namin noon, nung panahon namin, kung mayroong ganyan mga petisyon, pinababatid lang namin as a general policy to the ERC, and not just to the ERC, also the MWSS, kasi yung kanila naman tubig, yung presyo ng tubig, is to, and also even to the oil companies, is to make the increases gradual. That as a general policy, wala naman tayo kasi we cannot stop it No, the law does not empower the government to actually stop it unless there is a calamity. No? So ordinarily, you really can't do anything about it. Pero ang atin pong patakaran nun ay makiusap sa ERC, sa MWSS, pati dun sa mga kumpanya ng tubig, ng kuryente, pati yung kumpanya ng langis, na kung sila ay magtataas, ay wag naman bibiglain. Kasi siyempre, napakalakas ng tama nun. But the other policy, very important policy, is we actually have assistance to the poor. Meron po tayo ng lifeline rate, which I think is continuing, and that was dinagdagan pa rin ho yan. There is also socialized pricing sa tubig, no? Alam naman natin merong diesel rate para sa jeepney, no? So those things are being done, but of course tataas pa rin kung tataas, ano? And one of the reasons kaya lumala ang poverty mula 2003 up to 2006. And I think that those were kasi nung panahon namin between 2000 and 2003 nabawasan ng malaki nabawas sa kahirapan. Between 2003 and 2006 and even after that, hindi masyadong nabawasan ng poverty dahil tumaas ang presyo ng langis sa buong mundo, ng pagkain, rice, nagkaroon tayo ng food price escalation ng 2008 because of all the biofuel, the push for biofuel na maas tuloy ang gas, yung pagkain na dapat binibili ng tao, nagpunta dun sa biofuel, no? So all of those affected, raised prices, and that affected the efforts to reduce poverty during the latter part of the administration. No?
Alright.
Last question, sir. Yung sinabi nyo kanina, magkakaroon na tayo ng one Asian region sa economic region. Ang sabi nyo kanina, yung competitive ang Pilipinas because of the price ng kuryente. Anong ginagawa ng government para maging competitive tayo? Kasi are we ready dun sa one Asian region sa Asia?
Ito siguro dapat matanong nga sa Department of Trade and Industry and Department of Energy, no? Sila ngayon siyempre ang nakapwesto dyan. Ang hangad namin noon sa aming panunungkulan ay mapababa yung presyo ng kuryente, no? And I can cite two major efforts. Yung isa, if you will recall, pinagutos ng Pangulo noong 2002 na huwag magtaas ng singil ang NAPOCOR. Kahit na nagkaroon ng malaking pagkalugi ang NAPOCOR, no? The other thing that was done, which is part of the IPIRA law, yung pong kubra doon sa yung tinatawag na singil sa mga kuryente na hindi nagagamit pero binabayaran.
Systems loss.
Well, it's more than that. It's the yung pinakampanya to ni Enrile na siya yung lumalaban dito, no? But anyway, that one na dati kinukubra ng malaki, ikinalat over 20 years. So that hindi na halos malaki ang kubra. Yun, nakabawas din yun. Ano?
Yun na nga, marami tayong binabayaran sa Meralco na hindi natin ginagamit.
Nabawasan yun, kasi yung universal charge na yun, dati malaki yun eh. Nabawasan dahil ikinalat over 20 years. No? Okay. So that was another measure. Pero what we really need, ultimately, is we need to increase our supply because otherwise you will always have rising costs. No? One of the things na talagang kailangan tingnan ng mabuti sa batas, yung pong IPIRA law, ipinagbabawal sa gobyerno na magtayo ng power plant. There is a prohibition in the IPIRA law to build power plants. So it's all completely dependent on private sector power generation, which I think, kung hindi mag-invest yung private sector, what do? You cannot not have power.
Okay.
No? So this is the thing that I think needs to be looked at, how to ensure that the power generation keeps up with the demand, especially at a time when there is, especially with a law that prevents the government from building power plants and being completely dependent on the private sector.
If that is the case, pwede ba natin magamit yung malampaya proceeds to subsidize, let's say, ng mga 200 kilowatt or 400 kilowatt? Wag naman i-subsidize natin ni SM, no? Yung mga may bracket lang, wari hanggang 250, hanggang 350, kapag ganito karami yung nagagamit mong kilowatt hour, nakukonsumo mo, isa-subsidize ka. Kasi baka mangyari, i-subsidize natin yung 5 million na users, pati SM at saka Lusyutan, i-subsidize din natin.
Tungkol dyan sa bagay na yan, sa katunayan, nung 2007, kung hindi ako nagkakamali, when there was a big budgetary windfall in the government dahil yung ating interest rates, yung interest charges, bumaba. Dahil gumanda yung confidence sa bansa, the debt service of the government actually fell.
Yes.
And so we had a substantial saving from debt service. Yun po ginamit sa ganyan sinabi ninyo, no? The money was partly used for, if you will recall, nung panahon yun, nagbibigay ng, I think, 500 pesos sa mga maliliit ang konsumo ng kuryente. There was an actual distribution of funds. We did not lower the rate because it's already set by law, but we gave actual money to yung mga nakalista na ang konsumo nila mababa. No? So that was how we did it. But in effect, it was the same thing. There was a subsidy of sorts for those who were consuming less.
Gagawin ba ulit ngayon yun?
Well, I am not, unfortunately, not in the, in the position to answer that. Thank you.
All right. Yes. Please identify yourself.
Elmer James Bandol. Taga-Albay po. Online news. BicolToday.com.
Kanino po ang tanong?
Sa kay Senator Kitatad and kay Michael Billington.
Michael Billington. Yes, please go ahead.
Kasi I understand the way I assess the situation, we will have really a horrible scenario, and the next year, as Year of the Horse, we still believe that there's still hope or a light at the end of the tunnel, according to Melo, although it's a flickering light. What would be the answer if some regions would propose like a federalized system?
Federalized system will work.
Will work, just like the Bangsamoro, where will be a power sharing would be induced.
Okay.
Can we hear a comment from our senator?
Senator, do you think it's possible?
And
Michael, yes.
Well, para sa akin, hindi lang posible. It's necessary. Matagal ko nang in-advocate yon, yung federal system for the country. No? Para ang nangyayari po sa federal system, you are maraming component states or regions or provinces, whatever you want to call them, no? And they are competing. They're competing for growth, no? Pagalingan yan kung sino ang pinakamahusay. May distribution of power and responsibilities. Okay. So also nagkakaroon ng training ground for the best possible leaders from the federal states. Maaaring doon manggaling yung national leader mo. Kasi each one is responsible for his own state. No? Yun ang isa sa mga components ng systems change na gusto kong makita. No? Pero dapat yan ay talagang pinag-aaralan na maayos at uusapan ng maayos.
Michael Billington, could you please comment
Do you share
on
the same views about
something
federal
about
system?
the federalized approach to solve your that scenario that you gave us that we are in the brink of disaster? Is it possible that federalized system could solve the problems of our country?
Well, I'm not sure I should comment too much on that. The problem is that you have to have national unity. Sovereignty lies in national unity. And there's no question but that people who had devious, even evil intentions use principles that might seem good to justify breaking up the sovereignty of the nation. I can just mention from the American perspective, I know that the attempt to create the autonomous region in the South addressed some very real needs of the Moro people, but it was done in such a way that it would have allowed people in that area influenced from the United States to bypass the federal constitution and make deals with foreign energy companies to exploit the energy in the region, perhaps even to allow the Western powers to set up military bases in that region because they were given some power over their foreign relations. And this would circumvent your constitution, which says that there may be no foreign military bases in your country. So there's a very great problem in trying to tamper with sovereignty of the nation as a whole. What you have to do is find a way for all the different constituencies and different organizations to have adequate power within your government to have their voice heard. I think that's as much as I should.
Okay.
What about corporate marauders, for example? Do you think if federal system should be adapted, can we prevent or can we minimize when it comes to economic aspect?
It just won't happen. It won't work. That won't work. You have to take on the entire system. You can't try to manipulate within this broken structure to find some way to help some particular group's problems. It won't work. We're heading for the worst global economic breakdown in the history of mankind, and we're facing a war which will be thermonuclear, which could lead to the extinction of mankind. You have to keep this in your mind, because we have a great responsibility on us, each of us, in a moment of the greatest crisis of civilization, that we can't act for local personal interests, even local national interests that don't take into consideration the crisis that mankind is facing today. I won't go into detail, but as you all know, there's an effort to turn the Philippines against China at a time where the only hope for mankind is that the United States under new leadership can link up with China and with Russia to build a new global system based on development, based on the dignity of the human being. And the interests of the London and Wall Street banking interests, their primary concern is to keep the United States and China as enemies, to keep the United States and Russia as enemies. And sometimes smaller nations get used as tools in this broad evil concept of leading the world to a confrontation which could be a war, and in this age would be a thermonuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
This is a danger which you cannot put aside and think about local problems by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have last question as moderator. May I ask Rick, Senator Kit, and Michael, and Archbishop Cruz the same question? Do you think that trickle down, they say, among economists, would come to a reality? Do you ever think that such a thing as trickle down effect would be a reality? Let's start with Rick.
I mentioned earlier that you cannot just depend on systems and policies to properly distribute the world's wealth. This requires also a change in the heart. If you have a lot of greedy people and you put a perfect system, they will still not be able to distribute it well. So, you know, there is a lot that can be done on the policy side, and unfortunately, there are many things still wrong with the policies. But I would say that the challenge also to people is that even though the policies are wrong, if you can find a way, you know, a space in your heart to still cut through the policy and find a way to help the less fortunate, then that already provides a solution right here and right now for that person, no? And if we have more of such people, then it's not going to be trickle down. It's actually going to be compassion and development. But you know, it's I'd rather stress that because you know, while I agree that you know we have to fix the system, and there's you know at the same time when the system is broken and obviously will take time to fix it, then the immediate step is for people who of goodwill to have the Christmas spirit, so to speak. No. Thank you.
Yes, Senator. Do you think such would become a reality, the trickle-down effect in the economy? That all the gains of the country will go down and be bring benefits to the poor?
Well, I'm no economist. This question has been asked throughout the generations. But the truth is one, the errors are many. And the truth is that it's the human person that should really be at the center of all human development. The human person should both be the actor and the object of development. And systems are necessary to ensure that what your values dictate as absolutely necessary for the primacy of the human person should prevail. There are various types of systems. Systems that obviously will fail should be done away with. And human existence is an experience in going through all this. And we have seen what works and what does not work.
Okay.
Why do we insist on keeping what does not work? The system is broken, but you have an elite, a responsible elite whose interests are promoted and preserved by the system that does not work. It works for them, it doesn't work for everybody else. So, okay lang yun. This is it. We need to rebuild the system, even as we rebuild our values to preserve the integrity and dignity of the human being. Yes. The center of the universe is God. It's the creator of everything, the human person. So long as he does not forget that, he will continue to function as precisely what he thinks he is in pursuit of what is good for everybody else.
Okay, very well. Michael? The trickle-down effect as mentioned by economists.
Well, I agree very much with both of the previous statements. I would just add that trickle-down of what?
Development, the
but
gains.
if you have a system that's broken and if you have a productive system that's collapsing, if we're not producing enough food to feed the human race, if we've stopped producing energy, this is what's happening. There's a decline, not only a slowing down, but a decline of production. Behind all of this, you have to realize that the Queen of England and her consort, Prince Philip, who are still very much at the center of this imperial thinking, which has returned with a force, they believe and state over and over and over again that the biggest single problem in the world is that there's too many people. We can't sustain 7 billion people, they say, let alone 10 billion. They say that this earth can only hold about 1 billion. What's going to happen to the rest of the human race? That's what guides their thinking. These people are genocidal. They don't mind a war if it helps kill off some of the excess population. Prince Philip says he wants to be, if there's incarnation, he hopes to be reborn as an AIDS virus to help solve the overpopulation problem. This is a sickness that lives in our world today, which we have to fight. So there's nothing to trickle down. If we're producing, if we're inspiring populations to forge ahead on the frontiers of science, to expand those technologies to our productive process, to have new technologies in food, scientifically based food, then there's something to trickle down and you can ask the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Archbishop Cruz, do you think it's a Christian concept, this trickle-down effect? Because what remains, yung malalaking butil, pang mayaman. At yung mga mumu, yun ang pupunta sa karaniwang taong mahihirap.
Honest, I think it is not just a moral principle, but also an ethical norm that everybody should have enough. And what is happening now is that the middle class is disappearing. I'm talking of the Philippines. But let me go a little farther than this. The trickle-down effect, if we look at it in a lower level, it is possible and it could be real. But our economy now is global. Meaning to say, either the system in its global dimension is restructured and consequently it responds to the global needs. Then the question of trickling down is but for a small minority, and I think that is not the intention or the nature of the principle of the trickle-down effect. In short, what I'm saying is that yes, why not? Possibly a little, but the very fact that economy now is global, directly and indirectly, so the system must also have a global dimension to be able to bring down globally the trickle-down effect.
Okay. For Bert Swansing, Nelson Mandela, may he rest in peace, was quoted in his inaugural speech when he assumed office in 1994 that if you, my brothers, expect to ride brand new cars tomorrow, this will not happen. It will require of us a lot of hard work. In terms of the transport industry, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Because they say, we keep on selling cars, but there are no roads. Coming from the transport sector that you are, how do you look at it?
Well, we just hope that the light at the end of the tunnel is not the light from an oncoming train, you know? May prospects as far as the transport industry is concerned. It's just that those who are in authority should be able to play their cards well. Yun ang ano doon. And regarding the trickle down na yan, ang isang problema natin is maraming sociopaths. So you can look that up in the Google para malaman yung kung ano.
Iba yung socio rito, socio dyan. Iba pa yun.
Sociopaths. But for as long as we have sociopaths in our society, mahirap yun. Mahirap yung trickle down.
Okay. Sige po, si Archbishop Cruz, humirit. Baka abutin tayo ng tanghalian dito. Siya magpapatanghalian sa atin.
Sandali lang. Kalahating minuto. Bakit hindi natin ilimit ang numero ng sasakyan, ng kotse, na pwedeng ariin ng isang pamilya?
That is a question. We will reserve that for next edition.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Quick reply. Sa Singapore po, pwede kayong bumili ng auto kahit na meron na kayo. Pero merong entitlement fee na babayaran kayo na halos kasing laki ng halaga ng auto o mas malaki pa. So okay, kung gusto mo talaga isang katutak na sakyan, okay, papayagan ka, pero magbabayad ka doble. Oo. Pero wala tayong mass transport system. Ay ating problema from the very beginning. No?
Okay. May pahabol yung kaibigan ko si Dan Pasha. Meron silang pagpupulong to consult the people to address the 6 issues tungkol sa issues ng United Nations. Ito ay sa Arroceros Forest Park, December 27, 28, 29, 9 to 11 a.m. May kape at may merienda courtesy of Dan Pasha. May request, this will be the end of Tapatan for this year. May request dahil year-ender natin to eh. Susunod yung prospects and possibilities for 2014. May I just request Archbishop Cruz to lead us in a prayer for everyone, for the country, for the people, for those in distress, for those who have been victims of injustice. Please lead us in a short prayer and give us your blessing as well. That we will end our program this year. Archbishop.
May we stand?
Yes.
Almighty God and Father, we place ourselves before your presence. The Christian faith teaches us that you made us to your own image. We beg you to please help us keep that imagery, because only then can we as humanity move forward as desired by yourselves, so that after life is over here and now, we can move on successfully to the life hereafter and beyond. All this we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
For a blessing, please.
The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.